So good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, depending on where in the world you are. It's lovely to have you with us today for our second webinar. My name is Emma Cunliffe, and I'm the chair for the UK Blue Shield Conflict and Military Activities Working Group. So this is part of our webinar series introducing the 1954 Hague Convention and the risk to cultural property and UK heritage more generally. I'm delighted that today our speaker is from the Trident Manor Training Academy, and it's Andy Davis, who is an expert in the risks and threats to cultural venues, and he'll be able to tell you a little bit about himself. So a couple of things I just wanted to flag. This talk will introduce you to the threats to the cultural heritage sector with a UK focus, but we're not looking today at the whys of heritage protection and the what to do about it. That is part of this whole series. But we do have a number of resources on the UK Blue Shield website, which you can go and look at, and they deal with risk management, security, and a number of issues addressing heritage venues. This webinar will be recorded and it will also be made available on our website. We'll be taking questions at the end. If you have any, please do feel free to put them into the chat. But the Q&A will not be recorded. So if you're worried, please don't worry about asking stupid questions. We really do want this to be an open discussion where everybody can benefit. And with that, it is my great pleasure to hand this over to Andy Davis. Thank you, Andy. Can you share your screen?
I can try. I've just seen some people who are on here and they know my technical capabilities. Hopefully that's shared.
Yep, that's great. Thank you very much.
Lovely. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are, everybody. As the opening slide shows, understand threats to cultural and heritage sector. As that says, that's what this talk is about. My background is ex-military, it's ex-diplomat, it's ex-police, but for the last 13 years, I've been involved in risk assessment, risk management, looking specifically at security, and for the last 8 years, it has been with regards to the protection of cultural sites, venues, developments, and it's something I'm very passionate about. I want to see my kids grow up and my grandkids grow up so they can experience the cultural heritage that exists out there, and anything that I can do and my team can do to help protect that is for me is something worthwhile, but also it's actually quite nice that I'm involved in an activity that I really enjoy and appreciate. As Emma said, we can talk for weeks, months about how to protect different cultural assets and different venues. What I'm looking at today and what I'd like to talk about today is helping understand the threats that exist in the cultural and heritage sectors. And the reason why this is so important is you can't start protecting the assets if you don't know what can harm you or how they can harm you. So really what I'm looking at today is different, based on experience, based on what I've seen around the world and also in the UK, the different threats that exist and that I come face to face with. Me and the team do visit cultural venues, and we're probably involved in 15 different projects at this moment in time, and we undertake about 2 to 3 security risk assessments every month. So we build up and get to know and understand the different threats that exist, but also how there is no one size fits all, because museums, cultural venues come in different shapes, sizes, their exhibitions are different. Some are open air, some are closed, some have portraits. So we have to look at the broader aspects. So hopefully at the end of this session, you'll have a better understanding of how we as a team would approach and look at the different threats that exist in the cultural sector and how it can impact you. Thereafter, There'll be different sessions that Emma will have that obviously can talk about how to reduce and manage those. So just to take things forward, I suppose the first question is, what is a threat? And interestingly, whenever I recruit people, one of the first questions I ask is, tell me the difference between a threat and a risk. And sometimes that's the cruelness in me, because they don't know and understand. But for the purpose of this presentation, what I'd like to show there is a threat is a potential cause of an unwanted incident which may result in harm to individuals, harm to assets, a system, organisation, the environment or community. So it captures quite a wide area. Obviously, my background is from security. And so therefore, people say, well, okay, threats, it's all security related. What will hopefully show over the next, half an hour or so is that actually it isn't just about security related threats. It is much wider. And so what I'd like to do is just start showing some of the slides, and we will start with adversarial threats. The cultural sector, cultural heritage sector, does face several adversarial threats, and it's something that you would normally associate with a speaker from security. Our colleague in the top corner, organised crime, the mafia. Organised crime is highly impactful on the cultural and heritage sector. And that's not just in the UK, that is globally. From an adversarial perspective, they do impact and they plan. And when they actually target, they are normally successful because they've spent the time, have the resources, etc. Then if we look immediately below Don Corleone, we have a robbery that takes place. As you can see, there's somebody there with a gun. There's sledgehammers being used to attack and to steal diamond necklaces. We have pickpockets. Opportunistic crimes take place in museums, galleries, cultural heritage sectors, where the opportunity presents itself and somebody will take advantage of that. Now, it could be against one of your visitors. Equally, it could be against some of your assets and collections that are not secured, that may be left outside, may be exposed. That is, the opportunity presents itself and somebody takes it. Not a great deal of planning would normally go into that because, as we say, it's opportunistic. Burglary offences where people are going in, entering premises. Now, this could be very broadly, it could be when we talk about assets, it's not just the collections that are assets. It could be lead on roof. It could be stone walling. It could be anything that a criminal wants to actually convert from what you have into normally a financial gain or drugs or other commodity that they want. And of course, we also have, and it's something that I know the Blue Shield are very involved in, terrorism, conflict. All of these are adversarial threats that can and do impact the cultural and heritage sector. I'd like to show you another slide, and this is a slide which might not appear at first glances. What's he talking about? What we're talking about here is, the insider threat. Many organizations fail to recognize or want to recognize the threat that is posed by an insider. An insider doesn't necessarily mean staff. It could be subcontractors, it could be contractors, it could be people who are on job placement. It's anybody who you allow beyond those public realms where members of the public are allowed to travel. Insider threats are the impact of the insider threat is normally far higher than many other adversarial threats because they're trusted. They've got access that others have to force or circumvent. And that's what makes, one, the impact they have has been quite high. Two, the ability to identify them once they're inside. is very difficult. And three, it really supports the need for robust governance policies, practice, procedures. But we'll come on to that. So just outlining these as adversarial threats, I'd like to just go into a bit more detail on each and give you a demonstration how they actually impact the cultural sector. So this bunch of photographs, it's the O'Brien family. The Rathkeale Rovers are what they're called. They're known as, and there's been multiple operations across the UK, Ireland, Europe. As the name suggests, Rathkeale, they are from the south of Ireland, but their area of operation has been massive. Initially, they were involved in the rhino horn thefts that occurred. And then they were also involved in the theft of Chinese artifacts and jades. And that's the one I would just like to discuss. So they, although based in Dublin, used different crime groups and individuals from UK, from Europe, different families, and they were involved in surveillance, identifying where Chinese artifacts were, and then the execution of the attacks. So here they stole 57 million and showed multiple sites. Durham Oriental Gardens, very close to home to me, but then you have Bath, you have Stockholm, you have Bergen. All of these places were attacked successfully by this crime group. And what would happen is the items would be stolen and they would then be taken back to Dublin. They had a handler, the handler of stolen goods, the fence or whichever term wants to be used. He was a Chinese national based in a Hong Kong national based in London, and he would take them back to Hong Kong and then sell them into mainland China. An extensive police operation took place. They were arrested. Not everything was recovered, and in some cases, some items were lost. So, for example, they would stash them after committing the crime, and then they forgot where they were. So it doesn't mean to say organised criminals are as depicted on the television, but there is a degree of planning, degree of sophistication. So they were successful. So just to show, that's where the guys were based. They committed the crimes and they had third parties involved in these areas. The goods were shipped to Hong Kong, and then from Hong Kong sold to the Chinese market, where, as many of the Chinese, would say, well, it's repatriation of stolen goods from the Opium Wars, which, I can sympathise to a degree, but not for the impact that they have on the museums and venues. Just quickly, another one that, because it's finally come to fruition with organised crime groups, the theft of Maurizio's Catalan America. I didn't know whether this was a tongue-in-cheek reference, but the gold toilet, it's 90 plus kilos of gold, and it was at Blenheim Palace in the UK. This gentleman here in the what you can see in the photo, Michael Jones, he's just been, he's going to be sentenced in June 2025 this year, alongside the ringleader, a guy called James Sheehan, for the robbery that took place. Quite audacious, but here there was footage. You can see him on the left-hand side photo, and on the right-hand side photo, he actually took a selfie with him next to the golden toilet. The toilet was plumbed in. It was plumbed into the timber works that existed in this room, and they actually carried out the attack. And I'll just show you a quick video. Now, Blenheim Palace has 24/7 security. So these guys came. Nothing sophisticated about the tools that they're using. And that's something to remember. People will conduct surveillance. They will look for the vulnerable points. They will attack the vulnerable points to get the items that they want. if you notice, they're actually quite cool, calm. They're not panicking. They're taking the time, even though they'll know that there is security at that venue. And just on this video, if you look at the bottom of the screen here, you should be able to see security running out a bit after the effect, but equally, you know, the security guy would not have known whether or not they were armed, or what they were armed with. These type of attacks happen, and they happen across mainland Europe, in the Americas. They happen globally. They are well planned, well executed, and the rewards for them. For this, there was evidence to show that they got over half a million, I believe, £520,000 for the goods. There was a photograph shown of the bundles of cash. So, crime doesn't pay. They say crime doesn't pay. It obviously does. But equally, we have people who keep photographs on their mobile devices showing the amount of money, along with captions, which then sort of implicate them, and help the police create a case. So that's organized crime. What about opportunistic crime? And let's look at art. So this is the Tretyakov Gallery in Moscow. Unfortunately, this is not. This is a common occurrence where art is not hung correctly, it's not secured, and somebody can just take it off the wall and walk out. This was $1 million piece of art, and he did get away with it. The art was recovered. The Russian police did raid his house. They videoed it, and it was returned damaged. But just another demonstration. This was in a European venue. This was in their main gallery, but there was no cameras, and I was able to remove a piece of art. And I would have been able to leave with that concealed down my back, stuffed in the back of my pants. And that's the sort of opportunistic theft that can and does occur. What about robberies? Emma mentioned at the start that we're talking about the UK mainly. Normally, armed robberies do not occur with the frequency in the UK as they do in Europe. They are far more common, as is the use of firearms. But this was the Theft Art Fair a few years ago, and they called it the Peaky Blinder attack. So I'll just show it. The Theft Art Fair has actually been targeted previously. It was targeted when it was held in London. And again, it was a robbery that took place. On this one, what I absolutely love is this gentleman who's been sat there, cool as a cucumber the whole time, and just watches it as it goes by. So here, Peaky Blinders, it's the Peaky Blinders is what the media used, part of the Pink Panther crime gang, Bosnia Serbs, global footprint. They operate and they have been successful around the world. And in many cases, what you have to remember is very similar to the Rathkeil Rovers. They will get a jail sentence after stealing X amount of millions of pounds, and then they will return, or the jail sentence of 4 to 5 years, and then they're released. I'm sorry, somebody's drilling, and nobody told me it was happening. And they'll be released. So it is a high turnover. There are rich rewards made by these guys. Just quickly talk about some burglaries. The Isabella Stewart Gardner, £500 million is the estimated value of the artworks that were stolen. Antonio Moore has wrote about this. Really, the methodology that was used, the planning, but that's a sort of burglary. But sometimes it can be very, very simple. This is the Singalora Museum in 2020, and again, I'll just show you a video. because all of this relates to, if we know what and how offences occur. So it says here to break through 2 layers of protective glass. What is protective glass? You know, you've got to know and understand the levels of protection that certain materials can afford. So if we can see and understand that people will attack with a sledgehammer, what are we doing to actually help reduce it? But again, it shows it's not sophisticated. It's blunt force, straight in and straight out, carrying the Vanguard and a successful attack. So I'd like to then move on to the insider threat. As I've mentioned a couple of times or before there, that this is one of the ones where the sector generally does not want to believe that their friends and colleagues are capable of stealing. What we have to remember is we don't normally know whether somebody has gambling addictions, drug addictions, family problems, financial problems. We don't know whether they have a hatred for the organization, for management. We don't know. There's many things we don't know about individuals, our colleagues, but we do know that some of them are faced with opportunities and with temptations that mean that they will actually succumb to the temptations and actually carry out different crimes. I'm not going to mention the British Museum because that's people say, well, what about the British Museum? The British Museum has impacted, but at this moment in time, nothing has been finalised and there's been no court case. So I'll talk about a couple of scenarios that have been finalised. First one I'm going to talk about is John Nevin. John Nevin, curate for 20 years. He was described as a dutiful custodian, but he had access. He had access to the stores and he stole over 2,000 items. And it was the largest quantity of theft from a British museum. It's questions whether that's still valid, but he stole items by smuggling them out through his clothing, concealed in his clothing, never challenged. Obviously, different aspects enabled him to do this, but he was able to get away with it for several years, and it helped fund his lifestyle. Another one that I would like to show is the Munich Museum, where the paintings were swapped. Now, what I loved about, excuse me, this is in the German press, it just refers to the individual as a German technician. But what he did, and I'm going to have to, there's a slight mistake on the slides, on the bullet point, but I'll talk through them. He worked in the archives. He had access to artwork. He was able to smuggle them out, get them copied, and then return the forgeries. Excuse me. When he was able to return the forgeries, he then sold the originals until such point as the princess and the frog was actually seen, and the red flags were raised, and then a background check was done. Contrary to what it says at point 4, forget that bit, but he used the money for his lifestyle. He bought Rolls-Royce, expensive wristwatch, and an apartment. So if you can imagine, if point 4 was still in there, I'd move to Munich tomorrow because if I could get 60,000 euros. What happened was he had a suspended sentence and ordered to repay 60,000 euros to the court from the court by the court. 60,000 euros. Again, it shows how much of an impact an insider threat can actually have. With regards to insiders, the last piece I'm going to show, and this is from Verona in Italy. So again, when I look at this video, I think, why have we got pieces that are freestanding? You think about the movement, but also you think about how did they get in? They were armed and they were transnational. pause it there. How could they get away with it? Why was it so easy? Well, the insider threat actually came from the security guard. They targeted the security guard, or it could have been that they actually embedded the security guard, which is something that an organized crime group, successful groups will do, because they know and understand that it can take time. But if they've got somebody on the inside, it makes life so much easier, especially if they've got a security role. So there are many, many other criminal threats that exist in the museums and cultural section. That's just a snapshot of some of them. And as Emma says, she can share the she'll share this video thereafter. I would like to talk about terrorism. In many cases, we think of the terrorist attacks being in marketplace, but if you think of cultural settings, how many times have we had at Nice? We've had the seafront, on the promenade, we've had Christmas markets targeted, but here was the terrorist attack on the Bardo Museum. And we have to remember that the tourism and cultural sector, Tunisia, was just evolving.
Hanno sparato? Hanno sparato?
I'll just pause it there. Now, can you imagine that we're saying the terrorist attack, the terror on the people, on the visitors to there? But what that video also showed me is, did the staff know and understand what to do? We're not going to talk about measures, but I think that video is actually very powerful when we look at the broader aspects of what can happen and what we should do, steps we should consider if that were to happen. Now, we could argue that, hold on, this is not in Europe, it's not in the UK. Can it happen? Well, it has happened. We've had terrorist attacks in Belgium, where Jewish museums have been attacked. But actually, what about in London? I don't know if anybody knows this person, but it's Safabula, 18-year-old from Vauxhall. And she started planning. Her fiance, an IS militant, I believe, was killed, and therefore she started planning attacks in revenge. And one of the places that she started looking at was museums. And she carried out reconnaissance. It was going to be a bladed weapon attack. She looked at queues. Thankfully, she was arrested and detained. When she was arrested and detained, her mother and her sister came to see her in prison. And using code, she continued to plan the attack. Thankfully, it was intercepted, it was identified, and all three were arrested and received jail sentence. But that's an 18-year-old in London who became committed to the cause. And that's the thing with many of the terrorist attacks nowadays. They call them lone wolf, lone aggressor, lone attacker. It's not that they're part of any cell, it's that they've been indoctrinated through social media, through the dark web or wherever. And they're very, very hard for any security services to keep on top of, to keep one step ahead of. So terrorism, especially in crowded museums, crowded venues, is a genuine threat that actually exists and people should be wary of. Now, for those of you who are involved in Blue Shield activities, obviously warfare and conflict, it's something that you are very mindful of. You know, years and decades ago now, you know, we had the Buddhas of Bamyan, we've had the destruction of Palmyra, we had the Ukrainian destruction of cultural and heritage venues. The targeting of it. Here's a quick video, again showing the deliberate targeting of cultural sites in Ukraine.
Странно. Страшна ніч. 22:50. Пролунав дзвінок, сказали, що горить музей. У музеї влучила бомба.
Is it a tool of war? It certainly seems though that's been the case. Equally, when we lose these normal structures of government and the security and protection that's afforded, looting of archaeological sites and venues takes place. You know, Tripoli, Libya has been ransacked, and obviously more recently we're hearing the reports about Sudan being, you know, the National Museum being desecrated, assets are being destroyed, assets are being stolen, assets are being looted. It is a major problem, and it's wherever there's conflict, these sort of threats will occur.
The museum sits in the southern Ukrainian city of Kherson.
This relates to
Staff and
Kherson.
researchers say Russian troops stole its priceless collection of art and cultural treasures. More than 11,000 paintings and other artworks hauled away in trucks and buses. It's a story playing out not just here, but across the country. The theft of art is on a scale that experts say has not been seen in Europe since the Nazi plunder of World War II.
I mean, that to me it was powerful, and yeah, having worked with Ukrainian colleagues, I'm very mindful of the harm and hurt that's being caused. But it appears to be a systematic use of destruction of cultural and heritage as a weapon of war. Moving away from conflicts, there are still other adversaries out there. And really what I do have to point out is the cyber threats. As I say, we're doing probably, you know, 3 or 4 assessments of cultural venues every month. And the top, or certainly one of the top 3 threats that exist is the cyber threats. Whether that be malware, phishing attacks, ransomware, denial of service attacks. As a sector, we're trying to digitize, we're trying to get more online, increase accessibility. But every time we do that, we're actually increasing the risks and vulnerabilities that we have. There are several venues that have been targeted. If any of you ever get the chance of listening to anybody from the Royal Armies talking about their attack, it is so powerful because it brings it home as to how much of an impact it can have. But we also have the British Library. It's still, even though it happened in 2023, the full recovery hasn't taken place. And we have, you know, the National Museum of the Royal Navy. Internationally, in Europe, we've had attacks. In Americas, we've had attacks. You know, because organised crime groups know they don't have to step foot onto the premises to actually make lots and lots of money. So the cyber threat is a real issue. And if you think about the more we actually transpose our collections online and the need for more accurate recording, if somebody wanted to be a disruptor, whether that be at state level or somebody in their back bedroom, what greater way would there be than to all of a sudden delete the work that's, you know, records that go back hundreds of years. That really would have an impact on operability of archives, operability of collections, storage, etc., etc. So the cyber threat is real. But what about non-adversarial threats? Because actually there are an awful lot. And top of them, I'm putting in, this might be UK, but I doubt it, especially in the economic climate we're currently in, because there's so much uncertainty. You know, funding's been withdrawn from different American institutions. Funding isn't available, has never been available due to conflict and corruption, let's say in Africa. Europe is suffering. UK is suffering because of withdrawal of funding. So lack of funding is something that has always been raised to me as a major significant threat. And that's because without the funding, you might not be able to hire people. You might not be able to introduce suitable physical, technical, or operational protective layers. So funding actually is fundamental to the continued protection of assets. If you don't have the funding, something has to give. If something has to give by default, you are going to introduce vulnerabilities. If you introduce vulnerabilities, they can be exploited by criminals. Excuse me. Protests, industrial action. You know, we can look more recently at the industrial action by the security guards at the Science Museum, at the Natural History Museum in London. All of these actually do threaten and impact the protection of our assets that are there. Those who operate front of house, verbal abuse has increased, as has antisocial behaviour, drug and alcohol abuse, where people are using the facilities of the museum or the cultural venue to inject, or in some cases, certainly in Europe and in the UK, this has been reported, where sexual activities are taking place, you know, in darkened room, in the toilets there. So these are non-adversarial threats because they could lead to conflict. They can lead to loss of reputation, or they can lead to reputational damage, you know, and they are a threat to the normal ongoing operations of the venue. Maybe it's not of collections or artifacts, but certainly of the venue, of staff well-being, etc., etc.
Security.
What is worth more, art or life?
Protester threats have been, certainly in the last 5 years, have been on the increase. And part of it is because cultural venues are high profile. Artworks are high profile, so they can use it to get their message across to a wider audience. And they're tech savvy, they're using the internet, they're using different social media outlets to portray a message. They don't understand the level of damage that they can cause. They don't understand the increased risk that happens. So when we look at sunflowers, that has to be removed from the wall, which increases the risk of damage. It has to be transported somewhere, which increases the risk of damage. It has to then be taken out of the frame, which increases the risk of damage. The frame has to be cleaned, because if the frame isn't clean and you've got food items in there, it could turn to mold, it could then further impact. So all of these different aspects actually are a threat to cultural venues, to cultural assets, etc. So people talk about protests and say, oh, it's okay, it doesn't do any harm. They have glazing on. It isn't as straightforward and simple as that. They do harm, and they cause a lot of distress to staff. That's certainly something that's come across for those staff who I've spoken to who've been in a venue when these attacks have taken place. But I think what we have to be mindful of as well is that's shown protest, but what about civil disobedience or civil actions that are taking place, which, you know, far exceed what we would normally think or suspect. So very quickly, I'd just like to show, obviously, 6th of January, the Capitol riots. This is an attack on cultural heritage, you know, and this level of violence, etc., is really you know, it's extremely high, and the dangers that are posed to individuals, but also posed to the cultural heritage is massive. There are still traditional threats that exist. Fire. Fire is massive, and again, we've got videos, but you know, you can talk about Notre Dame, which has just reopened. You can talk about Brazil. You can talk about all of these venues. Fire is still a significant threat to cultural venues and heritage. We also have several environmental threats that exist. You know, and this can be from storm damage. It can be through everything that's highlighted there. There's a photograph of York. You know, we do have
museum now, and there is
cases where environmental impacts means there's been storm surges. There's been many environmental aspects that are impacting the cultural heritage sectors, and it's something we need to consider as to what and how they are impacting and to what level. We have to think wider. Think about infestation. There are threats from textile eaters, wood eaters, paper eaters, vermin. You know, all of these things. They're not. We can't really say that they're human adversarial, but they are a threat to our cultural sites, to our cultural heritage, to our collections, to our archives. Then we have human error. It's an error. It's not unintentional, but it can impact. You know, so water leaks, keys being left, or buildings being left insecure. We look at Mr. Big Bottom there because the product placement hasn't been sufficiently robust, or the item hasn't been secured. The one I would like to point out is information. You know, the unauthorized release of information, and that's depicted by the map there. Architects want to brag about their venues. Venues want to show and demonstrate what they have, what collections they have, and how they're going to exhibit them. We have to be careful because in many cases, you're reducing the risk and need of organised crime groups having to conduct in-person surveillance. You're giving them the information free of charge. And it is something that we have to be careful of. I work with planning departments to make sure we minimise the level of information that goes out. I work with architects so they don't say this is our secure store, this is our armory, you know, so the information is given that's needed, but it doesn't actually increase the threat to your assets. Last couple of slides. Excuse me. Operational threats. This is one of the biggest avoidable threats that exists, but it's something that I repeatedly come across all around the world. Lack of effective governance. Is there a policy in place? Are there robust procedures? Are there assignment instructions? Do these exist? Do these provide the framework in which an organisation, a venue, can and will protect its assets and give clear guidance of the parameters in which to operate? Ineffective risk management, poor threat risk and vulnerability assessments, awareness of the risks that exist, an understanding of how to conduct basic security risk assessment. It's not like a health and safety where you have tick boxes. You have to look, you have to assess, you have to evaluate, and you have to come to a meaningful decision about the level of risk that exists, which has to be accepted by the organisation. If it's not accepted, you'll never end up implementing them. And poor preparedness, crisis management, salvage plans, emergency responses. These are things that I come across day in, day out. And, you know, unfortunately, it is, you know, it's too regular an occurrence. Just to give an example, one venue, a salvage plan, there was only one person named in the salvage plan who still worked there. Out of the others who were named, 40% were dead. How effective do you think that salvage plan is actually going to be? Really important, because these plans, the crisis plan, salvage plan, emergency plans, are there to minimize your exposure to the threats that exist and actually speed up the recovery. My final slide, I'll just pass that one. This is something that's very close to heart, and it involves personnel.
Just stay here. Don't leave this room till I get back, okay?
This chart maps all the security elements for the big day. And as usual in these circumstances, I've given the operation a code name, which is Operation Whistler's Mother. It's not a snazzy title, but I think it works. Ooh.
Final point. Think about who you're hiring. Think about who you're using to help protect your assets. And if you do have to hire Mr. Bean, please make sure he's got a clean handkerchief. Thank you.